this state as a U.S. Senator, I would work hard to pass legislation like the SAME Act or similar to the SAME Act that would allow Georgia to get into the game of expanding Medicaid at the same rate as states that had the good sense to get in when we first expanded Medicaid. And so there are things at the federal level that I could do to make it even. Look, it would cost us next to nothing to do it now. But at that level, I would hope to be able to sweeten the pot to improve it also even more. Second, I would like to see us be able to get down the cost of prescription drugs. We're seeing big pharma dominate the healthcare of ordinary citizens. Recently, Doug Collins voted to prevent us from being able to negotiate the cost of prescription drugs. And so if you're on Medicare, you're paying perhaps twice as much as you need to be paying or could be paying for prescription drugs. There's a fix for that. And it is something that I would be focused on as a United States senator. We need to make sure that we protect the Affordable Care Act. I don't know why people think it's a good idea to get rid of the Affordable Care Act in the middle of a pandemic. We would leave 1.8 million Georgians who have pre-existing conditions, diabetes, if you had cancer, if you've had a heart attack. In fact, before the Affordable Care Act, being a woman was a pre-existing condition in a very real sense. We would leave a whole lot of people out in the cold. And both of my Republican opponents are complicit in the effort to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. And so I would actually stand up, absolutely stand up for ordinary people and make sure that we can drive down the costs and make sure that people have affordable access to good quality health care.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. This next question is also a multi-parter. Some might find it strange that a pastor would throw his hat into the ring of politics. Do you believe in the separation of church and state? How will your experience as a faith leader translate the leadership and representation Georgians deserve in the U.S. Senate?
Thank you so much. That's a great question. I absolutely believe in the separation of church and state. And I get that question from time to time. And the truth is, as a pastor, I probably have thought more about the separation and what's at stake in that than the average person. Because if you think about the separation of church and state, the protections go both ways. We don't want the state or the church to have undue influence on the state and its role to encroach upon its territory. But the reverse is also true. As a pastor, I'm thinking about what's the line between where the government ought to have influence on the church. So I absolutely believe in that separation. I think that it is one of the great hallmarks of our pluralistic democracy, this wonderfully messy experiment that we have in which diverse people with diverse perspectives, various faith traditions, or people who claim no faith tradition at all, somehow create a space where there's room for all of us to breathe free. And I believe in it. I defend it. I believe in the Constitution. Unlike our current president, I've actually read it, and I believe in it. And so I also think that this issue around values and how our faith informs where we come down on certain issues. As a pastor in the Senate, I hope to bring a different voice from what we're hearing in this moment. Too often, the loudest and most prominent religious voices in America today use their faith as a weapon. My faith for me is a bridge. I hail from a state where when you start talking about the Equality Act, the dignity and the equal protections that ought to be extended to members of the LGBTQ plus community, the pushback comes sometimes from people who push so-called RFRA laws, freedom of religion laws. I think that it would be of great value in this moment to have a pastor in the Senate say that I find it deeply offensive that you would suggest that extending equality to my sister or my brother is somehow an affront to my religious liberty. That is a deeply offensive idea for me. I don't believe that there's any such thing as equal rights for some. And I look forward to arguing and defending and pushing the PRO Act. I support marriage equality, and we need to go beyond that and make sure that our members of the LGBTQ plus community don't face discrimination at work and with credit and other things that have to do with their ability to live a quality life.
Thank you. That answer actually gives a perfect segue to the next question. After the passing of SCOTUS Justice Ginsburg, Republicans in Washington are scrambling to nominate a new hard-right justice to fill her seat. In light of recent developments around the Supreme Court, landmark decisions on LGBTQ equality and reproductive justice hang in the balance. How will you use your power as a US Senator to protect LGBTQ Georgians and a woman's right to choose?
As I said, I'm an ally of the LGBTQ plus community, and I will be full-throated in my commitment to those principles. I don't believe that there's any such thing as equal rights for some, and I wholeheartedly support a woman's right to choose. I think that a patient's room is a mighty small place for a woman, her doctor, and the United States government. I've long been an advocate of reproductive justice, and I think we need to extend it beyond the question of reproductive choice. The fact of the matter is, the United States of America has high rates of maternal mortality and infant mortality that far surpass our other Western counterparts. We should be deeply offended as Americans by the high rates in which women die trying to have a baby in this country, particularly in states like Georgia, and the rates are 3 to 4 times higher for Black women. So my commitment to reproductive justice extends also to making sure that we have quality access to healthcare.
Also gives a segue into our next question. What measures need to be taken to reduce the maternal mortality rate, especially the Black maternal mortality rate in Georgia and the United States?
Well, we need to deal with the question of affordability and access, and expanding Medicaid would greatly help, and strengthening the Affordable Care Act. But Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in or as a result of childbirth than their white counterparts. And a Black woman with a college degree is 1.6 times more likely to die in death than a white woman with a high school diploma. And so clearly there is bias. This is what we mean when we start talking about systemic injustice, and people wonder what we mean. Well, the data is there. And we need to take it seriously. And there are a whole range of ways in which we need to address it, not least of which we need to make sure that there are more people of color in the pipeline to get into medical schools. Because we do see that some of that, it is modulated considerably when you have people of color in the healthcare system.
And Eden, if I can add here one additional piece, because we need to send Reverend Warnock to the Senate, but we've got to remember that we don't elect saviors, we elect systems. And so we need to have other people who can support the work that he's going to do in the US Senate. And to address some of these issues, particularly maternal mortality issues in Georgia, it's going to be equally important that we also elect candidates for the state legislature who can actually help make those changes that are approved at the federal level, make them real at the state level. Because often we'll have federal action that doesn't get translated into local action because we don't have the right legislators. And so when you go and vote in that ballot, when you go to that special election and find Reverend Warnock's name at the bottom of that first list, make sure you keep going through the ballot, because it's the state legislature that's deciding whether we have expansion of Medicaid. It's the state legislature that determines whether we're going to allocate the resources necessary to recruit and retain doctors of color in the state of Georgia. Morehouse School of Medicine produces more of those doctors than I think almost any other place in the South. And without having the support that comes from federal action by a U.S. Senator Warnock, but gets made real in the state of Georgia by state legislators, then we are going to find ourselves continuing to circle the solutions we need. And so please remember not only to cast your ballot for him, but to send help by making sure that we also vote the entire ballot, because we've got to change the whole state. And we've got to make certain that we're picking people who see all of us all the time.
Thank you to both of you. Thank you so much. This last question for this portion is actually for Ms. Abrams. Rightfully so, people are uneasy about voter suppression in Georgia. Many Georgians remember tremendously long lines, countless Georgians being purged from voting rolls, and mail-in ballots being refused by the thousands in. Can you talk about what has been done to address the tactics used in 2018 and most recently during the 2020 primaries? Also, what are some ways voters can actively protect themselves in November?
Certainly. So number one, in the wake of the 2018 election, when I declared that I would not concede a system that could misuse and disenfranchise so many thousands of Georgians, we have been hard at work through Fair Fight Action. But I also want to lift up other organizations that have been doing this work as well, because what is so critical about this year is that we've had groups working in tandem, not in opposition and not in isolation. And that is an important change for the progressive movement when it comes to access to the right to vote. What we have been a part of, I would say there are three top things. Number one, being able to register in the state of Georgia and stay on the rolls remains a challenge, but we were able to make progress first and foremost by ensuring that exact match has been diluted. It hasn't been eliminated, but it's been sufficiently diluted that we saw many fewer people held hostage. We know that in 2018, it was 53,000 people, 80% of whom were people of color, who were held hostage by exact match. That's been mitigated. We saw changes made to who can be purged and how frequently. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State had to admit to making 22,000 mistakes during his voter purge in October of 2019, but we were able to keep those thousands of people on the roll, and we were able to notify thousands more. Unfortunately, he still purged more than 100,000 people who, under the law passed in Georgia in 2019, should have been permitted to stay on the rolls. Even though we couldn't save all of those from being purged, we have changed the law so that going forward, it's going to be harder to take people's names off the rolls simply because they haven't voted. Number three, we were able to make dramatic changes in absentee ballots. I'm glad you raised that. We were able to secure a consent order, a consent decree where the state of Georgia had to put finally on paper a uniform system, because we know in Georgia, depending on the county you lived in, if you were in some counties, they'd call you up, say, there's a problem with your ballot, come down here and fix it. And in other counties, you would find out your vote didn't count because you read it about it in the AJC. And so we have now created a more uniform, or the state has to create a more uniform process. And the most important thing is that voters now have to be notified and given an opportunity to actually fix mistakes on their ballot. That's why it's so important, if you're voting by mail, to not get frustrated and not get distracted. They have to let you know if there's a problem, track your ballot. And when you find out that there might be an issue, they're going to let you know. And if they don't let you know, let us know. You can text GA to 70700. That's Fair Fight's number, and we will help you. But writ large, what we know is that heading into this election, we still face some challenges. We had won a huge victory through the New Georgia Project. We'd won a huge victory where absentee ballots were going to be counted if they were postmarked by Election Day, which is the gold standard. Georgia, unfortunately, operates under a voter suppression standard that says that it has to arrive by Election Day, even though you have no idea what's happening with the post office. And let's be clear, our taxes have to be postmarked. Why do our ballots have to arrive? Why do we have to guarantee the date of arrival? And so the courts agreed with us on the district court level. Unfortunately, a Republican conservative packed appeals court reversed that decision. We're still going to keep fighting it, but we don't know what the outcome is. And so we need people to be absolutely certain that you return your ballot early. As soon as you get it, fill it out and return it, because the best guarantee for it to count is that it doesn't run into that deadline. But we've got 22 days to get this done. Writ large, here's what I need folks to do. Number one, don't panic. We saw long lines today. We've heard stories of glitches. we see misinformation and voter intimidation, we know that they're going to be coming after us. But what we have to do is not get distracted by their chaos and by their meanness, because they're only doing it hoping that we will get distracted and not stay on mission, not be determined to cast our ballots. So number one, don't panic. Doesn't matter what they do your thing and make certain you focus on the prize. Number two, don't delay. As we saw today, there were still glitches, there were long lines. Some of this is a good thing because Georgians are excited, they're energized. We had more absentee ballots returned in the state of Georgia already than the total number that were filed in 2016. So we know people are wanting to get this done, and we apparently saw that everybody in Georgia who plans to vote early decided to show up today. But we also know there were glitches in the machines, and we need to continue to work to make certain that the county is getting the support they need from the Secretary of State's office so that every voter who wants to vote early can do so, but we cannot delay. The earlier we vote, the earlier we bank our decisions, and we have time to help other people cast their ballots. We have time to fix any mistakes. If we don't panic and we don't delay, we will win.
Thank you so much to the both of you for answering these questions. It looks like we have a bit more time. So now I'm going to ask a few questions that the team grabbed from the chat today. Either one of you guys can hop in to answer these. The first one is, what is the number one thing supporters can do to help Reverend Warnock's path to victory without a runoff?
Stacey, I'm gonna let you answer that question.
Okay. Number one, don't panic. Number two, don't delay. But number three, we know that this is a special election with 21 names on the ballot. If you're voting at home with your absentee ballot in front of you, you know that it's coming after a couple of other races, some important ones like president and the other Senate race, but it's a special election. And so we need people to look at that special election and go to the bottom of the list. But at the bottom, you're going to find the winner, and that's Warnock. So we need to tell folks to look for Warnock on the ballot. If they're going to vote in person, the machines are just going to be calibrated differently. And so we need people to look for a special election, and we need them to look for Warnock on the ballot. So look at special election, it's going to be near the bottom, but the winner is near the bottom. That's important because people need to understand that we can win this outright. Reverend Warnock is polling in the upper 30s. And we know that Georgia Democrats, we total more than 30%, 35, 36, 38% of this population. We have seen other candidates fall back, but we need to get his name out. And over the next 22 days, you need to be proselytizing the name of Reverend Warnock. And that means telling people not just who he is, but why you support him. We know that in the time of COVID, door knocking, the regular way we communicate, has just been pushed aside. But what has always been the most effective way to turn out voters is relational voting. And that means when you do it, you tell somebody what you've done and why you did it. And in this moment, there can be nothing more urgent in Georgia than sending 2 U.S. senators to D.C. to support our state. Kelly Loeffler has done nothing to help our people. And when Reverend Warnock talked about pre-existing conditions, let's remember, 300,000 Georgians have been infected with COVID. And we know, according to the science, many of those people now have a pre-existing condition that she will leave them alone without healthcare, without support. So we need to have Warnock as the name on everyone's lips and the person they pick on that ballot. And so 1, don't panic. 2, don't delay. 3, tell folks where to find his name. And then 4, sign up. Go to warnockforgeorgia.com, sign up to be a volunteer, make those phone calls, send those text messages, do the work we need to do to make sure that people understand that we've got one shot at this, or we've got a shot to do this one time. If we have to go to a runoff, we will, but we don't have to go to a runoff. And I'd rather take January off and celebrate the election of Joe Biden. And let's go ahead and send Raphael Warnock up there to celebrate with him the first time out.
Our next question is, what does a special election mean? How many people are you running against?
So there are 21 names on the ballot. And as Stacey said, because the names are listed alphabetically, and my last name is W, guess where I am? I'm in the same place I was when my elementary school teacher lined us all up for lunch or recess. always the kid next to the last kid in line. And so we need folks to look for my name. What makes it a special election is that the Democrats and Republicans are all on the same ballot. So there was no primary to decide a Democrat who's going to take on a Republican. Dems, Republicans, Independents were all on the same ballot November the 3rd. And you've got to have 50% plus one in order to win. And if nobody gets over 50%, then we go to a January 5th runoff. So if we got to go to January 5th runoff, we'll do that. But Stacey is absolutely right. We should and we can win this race on November the 3rd. And I think as people are hearing my message all across Georgia, they are responding. We're getting a great reception as we move around and tell people that there are 2 Senate races in Georgia. And this is the special election. The road to flipping the Senate blue clearly rides right through Georgia.
Thank you so much. The next question is, we already know that voter suppression will take place in many forms on and before Election Day. We saw some of that today. What should we be doing now to try and prevent it? Are there important numbers to call if we see problems at the polls?
Thank you so much. So here's what we need to do. Voter suppression exists anytime you are prevented from voting or discouraged from voting. And we know that sometimes that is unintentional, sometimes it's very intentional, but intent doesn't matter. If you're prevented from voting, then it's voter suppression. And so the first thing is to know what it looks like. That means if you are having difficulty or someone you know is having difficulty casting their ballots, don't assume it's user error. Don't think it's your fault. Ask for help, because if you don't ask, not only will you not get help, but someone who probably is in the same situation as you won't also get help. And it's good for us to know what's going on. So if you text GA to 70700, that's how you contact Fair Fight using text messages. But everyone can call 866-OUR-VOTE. 866-OUR-VOTE will also connect you with lawyers who can help you answer questions, people who are manning these hotlines. It is a fantastic resource. The third thing you can do is know that when you flag an issue, even if you don't get an immediate response, don't think that you weren't heard. Often what we've got to do is once we get that information from you, is we have to go and find out from local officials who are actually managing the elections. We've got poll watchers who are in place, who are also seeing things. So if you don't hear back immediately, do not think you haven't been heard. What's happened is often that we are trying to solve the problem, but many of these things can't be solved in a single day, especially on the first day of early voting. And so don't think that no one's paying attention. Don't think that you haven't been heard. See something, say something, but also know it's going to take a minute to do something. But that's why early voting is so critical, because if we can get those things figured out now, we will know what we have to do every single day. We'll get better at it. Every single day we can hold people accountable. And we have to think about this as election season. We no longer have an election day. We have to think of November 3rd as last call. Our elections have been going on since September, and it's going to continue. Last call is November 3rd. And so if you see something, let us know by texting GA to 70700 or calling 866-OUR-VOTE. We tried to make it as easy as possible to let us know what you see. And this is true across the state of Georgia. Fair Fight is working. Groups are working across the state, and we want to make certain that every vote can be cast and every vote gets counted.
Thank you so much. Our next question is for Reverend Warnock. You've often said that this election is about restoring the soul of our democracy. What specifically would you do to help bring the nation together if you are elected?
Thank you so very much. Listen, I think that part of what's lacking in leadership in this moment that we're seeing is empathy. Just the ability to walk in other people's shoes and to feel that their struggles. And that empathy muscle is something that I've had occasion to exercise as part of what I do as a pastor. When I talk about healthcare, this is not a theoretical issue for me. I've walked alongside folks as they've been facing these issues. I remember, and I think often about the first COVID-19 death in my congregation, and there have been a few. He was a high school football coach, a husband, father of two beautiful twin daughters, young girls who grew up in my church. And as I looked into their eyes and their mother, and to think about what was going on and had happened to them, I'm thinking about them when I'm thinking about the 300,000 people that Stacey mentioned that have been impacted by COVID-19 in our state. I'm thinking about conducting that funeral on Zoom as we did, to make sure that everybody remained socially distanced, and the ways in which in this moment, even the ways in which we would normally comfort one another, we've been prevented to do so. So we just have seen a lack of empathy in leadership. We haven't had leadership that's even taken the responsibility for helping us to mourn as a nation what has happened. 9/11 was devastating, but we lost, several thousand people, in 9/11, and we've lost over 200,000 Americans in the midst of this pandemic. And what we've seen is a kind of callousness, not just in the most obvious ways and the things that are just off-putting. Kelly Loeffler the other day sent out a tweet when President Trump came home from the hospital saying that coronavirus was no match for the president. It was a silly thing of him wrestling down a man who was supposed to be the coronavirus, saying that there was no match for the president. And she's a U.S. senator. Over 7,000 Georgians have died from COVID-19. So tell that to those families. So we need empathy. We need people who will bring us together and not simply engage in the politics of division. And I think more often than not, that's what we see in our politics way too often. And if you listen to the other side, I think their argument can be summarized in two words: be afraid. Be afraid of people who don't look like you. Be afraid of folk that who are coming across from somehow to get what belongs to you. Be afraid of one another. And we have to push against this impulse and politics of fear, and put forward a politics of hope that reminds us that we've seen dark days before. We've had challenging moments before. And we get through it when we find a way in the midst of all of these challenges to stand together. And so that's the voice that I hope to bring to Washington, D.C., one that would continually remind us of the covenant we have with one another as an American people, e pluribus unum, out of many one. That's hard work. It requires that we be thoughtful. It requires that we, listen to the perspective of people who have experiences different from our own. But it's absolutely necessary for the health of our democracy.
Thank you so much to both of you for your time. We're coming towards the end. So Ms. Abrams, would you like to help close us out?
Sure. I want to remind people that we have a chance to win this, but it's not just about winning, it's about how we win and why. We win by not panicking. We win by not delaying, but we also win by remembering why we vote. I know for a lot of young people who are listening to this, it is hard to understand why you should pick one party over the other. But I like to remind folks that parties are shorthand. They are shorthand to tell us sort of where people begin the conversation. I'm a Democrat, not because I agree with every Democrat I've ever met. I'm a Democrat because I believe in the principles espoused by my party. And my party says that it believes in progress. It believes that people should have an opportunity, but it also realizes that not everyone starts off at the same place, and that sometimes you need a little extra help. And more importantly, that sometimes there are things we have to do together that people should not be expected to do alone. And so I'm not asking people to change their party positions. I'm asking them to look at the principles that guide their lives. I'm a Democrat because I believe in people. And I believe that my responsibility is to not only serve the people I love, who I know, but to serve those who share this common space with me. That's why I fight. That's why I work. That's why I vote. And we win when we remember that's who we are. But we also win when we remember that voting is a process. It is not a magic pill. It will not solve every problem. And anyone who tells you that voting is the answer is not telling you the truth. Voting is part of the answer. The other part of the first part is we have to protest in the streets, then we have to protest at the ballot box, then we have to protest in the halls of power. But it is easier to do all of those things when we send people to those halls of power who actually remember where they came from. And I am voting for Raphael Warnock because I know this person. I know who he is. I know what he believes because I have seen him live his beliefs every single day. This is a man who went to jail to defend the issue of healthcare, to say that people should have the right to live in Georgia and to survive in Georgia, and that we should not be squandering our money out of meanness and pettiness. This is a man who fought not just for criminal justice reform, but took it into his own hands to make certain that that reform was real. And this is a man who stood shoulder to shoulder with me when the Secretary of State called us liars and frauds simply because we believed the people of color had the right to vote in the state of Georgia. And when other people, including people on our side of the aisle, turned away, Raphael Warnock stood firm. In fact, sometimes he stood in front of me because that's the person he is. And that's what we need. We need someone who sees his faith as a shield to protect, not a sword to strike people down. We need someone who understands that the separation of church and state means that you don't separate yourself from your values, but you don't try to impose your faith on others. And we need a U.S. Senator from the state of Georgia who does not believe that buying power is the same as serving people. I want you to vote for Raphael Warnock because I believe in the future of Georgia. And I know that if we have 2 U.S. senators, Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, if we send him to Washington, D.C., we will be sending power to D.C. We will be sending purpose to D.C., and we will be sending progress to D.C. And that, to me, is exactly what we need in the Georgia of tomorrow. So, Eden, thank you so much for having me. Raphael Warnock, thank you for being an extraordinary candidate. And everyone on this call, don't panic, don't delay, make your plan, vote early, and let's get it done.
Let's get it done, everybody. Thanks so much, Stacey. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you to both of you. Lastly, we'll be having Kiana to help us close out.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Kiana and I'm the Digital Organizing Director here at Warnock for Georgia. This town hall is very special to me as my first political campaign job was working on the Stacey Abrams campaign in 2018. I know that the work we started in 2018 to turn Georgia blue is continuing with the work we are doing to elect Reverend Warnock for Senate. We are almost 20 days until Election Day and need your help. Just like you've heard, to win in Georgia, we need all hands on deck. We have entered the get out the vote phase of the campaign, where all of our focus is turning out voters for Reverend Raphael Warnock. We may be distant, but organizing is still happening. We are still recruiting volunteers, we are still talking to voters, and we are still getting out the vote. We are reaching out to voters where they're at. This includes phone banking, reminding your friends to vote with our relational tool Outvote, no contact literature drops, and visibility at voting precincts. Join Team Warnock by going to warnockforgeorgia.com/volunteer. There you can learn more about our volunteer efforts and sign up for a shift. Even if you live out of state, you can still help us talk to voters in Georgia virtually from anywhere. Just as Stacey Abrams said, getting your friends and family to vote is one of the most powerful tools to turn out voters. For those of you who have already voted, share your voting pictures to remind your friends to vote by using the hashtag #IVotedWarnock. Then ask your network to do the same. The only way we will flip the Senate and turn Georgia blue is with supporters like you joining our grassroots movement and volunteering to help in these last 20 days. Georgia is a battleground state, and it's going to take a strong team of supporters like yourself to bring the change we all want to see. The way to see this change is to get involved and vote. We can do this, Georgia. We can win with Warnock. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see all of you volunteering.